Okay, so let's start. What's this? Okay, so this is the document that we'll be learning. I'll just go over quickly the table of contents. We'll explain everything in English. All right, so it starts off with first of all, there's going to be an introduction to the introduction. And the course is going to go through the different generations, starting with the actual receiving of the covenant. Why do we follow the Torah? What obligates us to follow 613 laws? Anybody have any ideas?
Who was commanded to follow?
Who is commanded?
The Jewish, we as Jews. When Moses at Mount Sinai, no?
Under what right did anyone have to command us to keep 600 laws, 613 laws?
It's because Jewish people, they want, because the Torah original to give to other nations, and they don't want. And the Jewish people say, we want, and we don't understand, but we can do first, and later we understand, and we understand first, and then we follow.
I see. You've been studying this for a while. Yes, so the number one basic concept in Judaism, I would say, is consent, the covenant, right? Nothing was forced on us. Sam Harris, anyone here of Sam Harris? Sam Harris is one of the more bright and intelligent, outspoken atheists that I know of. And he says, well, why do I need to follow a religion? What right does God have to tell me what to do? And the common answer is, well, because God created you. So if he created you, he can tell you what to do. And he says, I'm sorry, I don't accept that. I never asked God to create me. Did we ask God to take us out of Egypt? Did we ask God to create us? So what right does he have to come and tell me how to live my life? He forced life on me. And the truth is, I have to agree with him. We don't keep the Torah because we were told to, because God took us out of Egypt and therefore we owe him, or because he created us, therefore we owe him. And that's why we have no issue with any non-Jew who doesn't want to keep the Torah, that doesn't want to follow Judaism, right? We don't believe that if you're not part of our religion, then you have no salvation. Then you're damned to eternity in hell. We believe in the covenant because we freely contracted it with God. He came to us with a proposal and we accepted. And this proposal and acceptance of his proposal is recorded in our fundamental document called the Torah in the book of Exodus. So the number one, I said the number one, in Hebrew we call it the ikar, the fundamental belief of, or the basis of all of the oral law, is that it's all based on a consensus. And I'm going to give you a little summary here of the entire course right now. All right. So these are the 5 rules that come out of this entire course. One is Kol Tokef HaTorah, the validity of the Torah entirely, Od Mimeh HaBerit BeHorev, all the way back from the days of the covenant itself that was contracted in Horev, Mount Horeb, and at Sinai, Umitokef Haskamat Klal HaTzibur, is all. It's valid only because it had national consensus. The entire nation accepted it upon themselves. וכן נכון הדבר לכל הדינים המתחדשים. And so too, not just with what we accepted at Sinai, but any of the newer laws that came later on, such as, can anyone give an example of a later law that's not part of the Torah?
For instance, the heritage of 5 daughters of the person who
Zelofhad. All right,
Yeah.
that's an interesting one. However, that one is already in the Torah. We're talking about that's it. The Torah, the 5 books of Moses are sealed, they're closed. All right, the Jews are already in the nation. Who knows? Maybe even 100
Is it
years,
to do-
1,000 years later.
Is it to do with that came after the rabbis halakhic, the laws that the
It
rabbis
could
gave
be.
us?
I'm not.
Yeah.
That we'll be talking about soon. But for instance, recently we had a holiday.
Hanukkah. Okay, yes.
Hanukkah
No,
is
it's
Lord.
Purim. It's
Purim.
Purim.
Soon we'll have Purim. Recently we had Hanukkah. We have a mitzvah on Hanukkah to light the candles. We have a mitzvah on Purim to read the Megillah. These are laws that aren't part of the 613. These were laws that were instituted by the rabbinical court. What gives them the right to add these laws?
Hashem told us to listen to the teachers to come.
Okay, that's why we need to listen. But why can they make a new law?
Because it was a miracle. That on Purim, the whole Jewish nation would have been wiped out. But to remember that, they made the laws. That's what I think.
So that gives them the right to change the volume of the mitzvot that God gave us.
I don't think
Could they do the opposite and wipe out a mitzvah based on a miracle?
No.
No, why not?
Because
Because it's final and it cannot be changed.
But yeah, they changed, they added.
The Purim is not from Torah, but from the history, their memory for save the Jewish nation, for save the country. That's why we celebration. But it's not from the Torah, right? It's not from Torah for the Hagid.
It's not part of the 613. There are a few extra mitzvot. By the way, Netilat Yadayim is a mitzvah,
Okay.
but it's not mentioned in the Torah. Not only is it not mentioned, there are mitzvot that are not mentioned in the Torah, but they are considered biblical mitzvot. But Netilat Yadayim isn't one of them. That
Because
was
they are-
added by King Solomon.
Probably because they are mentioned in oral Torah, not in Chumash.
protector the
No, so
Torah.
these weren't mentioned in oral. I mean, it was passed down. Once it was enacted, it was passed down orally. However, its origin isn't from the oral or the written law. It's from the court, the Supreme Court.
It's from the time of Anshe Knesset Agdolah. They were chosen. Right.
Some are from, some are earlier, some are later. The story of Hanukkah took place after the time of Anshe Knesset Agdolah.
Right.
The story of Purim was around their time, a little bit before. All right, so new laws, takanot, gezerot are things that the rabbis forbade to do, that according to the Torah were permissible. Hem tekefim, they're valid only because kol hatzibur hiskimu alehem. The entire public agreed, they consented to it. If the court wouldn't have reached an agreement about it, and the public, the entire nation, wouldn't have accepted it upon themselves, it would have no validity, and it wouldn't have continued till today. V'chen Mishnah ve'Talmud, and so too the Mishnah itself and the Talmud. You've heard of the Mishnah and the Talmud? Basically, the biggest project that we have on the oral Torah that binds everyone till today. All the laws that we have today are all recorded in the Talmud, in the Mishnah and the Talmud. Tekefim v'chiyuvam hal al kol ha'am, right? They are valid and they obligate the entire nation. Why? Who can answer? Before I read the rest. There's one reason.
To unite us?
Why do they apply? Why do they obligate us? Based on what we said up until now, what's the one thing that can obligate us as a people?
Because the whole nation agreed to
There
this.
you go. Because they were accepted with mutual consent by the entire nation. The Mishnah could have just as well been lost. Could have just as well not been accepted by the majority of the rabbis and not spread out throughout the nation. And in that case, it wouldn't have been valid ever. In fact, we say, the Mishnah has 6 volumes to it. However, those 6 volumes, before the Mishnah was put together, they consisted of, they say, 700 volumes. Because basically what it is, it's the recordings of all the different students throughout the generations, their own personal recordings of the laws that aren't binding. Those personal recordings of the students isn't binding law. However, a few of those students had really, really good, when you're in school or in college, there's always a few students who have, the best summaries of the class. So a few of the Hachamim had the best summaries of the class. And everybody in the class, right, or all the Hachamim, they said, wow, these were written very briefly, very concisely. They really cover everything. And so that's why we're going to accept these writings over all the others. And that's the only reason why those specific writings that we now call the Mishnah are binding to everyone else. Because everybody else accepted those. And if instead of Rabbi Meir, right, Rabbi Oshaya would have had a different summary and maybe a different law. Possibly he disagreed with Rabbi Meir. Then we'd have different laws today. The laws that are binding are the ones that were accepted by the general public and that spread out throughout the general public.
Sami, sorry, I have a question.
Yes. Who's
So
talking?
Elena. So the
Mm.
mitzvot which were developed, so to say, by the rabbis after the Torah, do we still call them mitzvot?
Some of them. So that's a good question. Chanukah, Purim, Nitilat Yadayim, those things are considered mitzvot. However, we don't count them as part of the 613 mitzvot. As opposed to other things, for instance, the prohibition against eating milk and poultry. By the way, milk and poultry is a later prohibition, only been around like 1500 to 2000 years. Before that, it was completely permissible. That is not considered a mitzvah. That is falls under the category of gezerah, something that the rabbis enacted in order to prevent people from going over a biblical mitzvah. We'll learn a lot more about that later on. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
This number one, which we are on now, it says Mishnah Talmud.
Right.
Isn't Mishnah a part of Talmud?
Okay, that's a good question. We're going to learn later on in the course exactly what constitutes the Mishnah and what the Talmud. Now, the Mishnah was compiled, it's a few hundred years prior to the Talmud. We see it as included now in the Talmud because the whole objective of the Talmud was to expound on the Mishnah. Because we said the Mishnah was basically compiled by the best summaries of the top students, right? But later on, the Chachamim that came later on, they had a hard time really understanding every nuance in those summaries. So they'd have discussions on those summaries. And those discussions, those recorded discussions, and their and their conclusions in the end is what was as recorded is what we refer to as the Talmud.
So Talmud, like now what Talmud is, like a definition, it's also, we can say it's Mishnah plus this new discussions about summary.
Right. On the Mishnah. The summary itself is the Mishnah. I'm just simplifying it, right? There's a lot more to the Mishnah than that.
Okay, but Mishnah is oral Torah, so Talmud is just discussion about this oral Torah.
Right, exactly.
And
it's the
Gemara
discussions and the conclusions.
and the Gemara is a part of Talmud.
The Gemara and Talmud are the same thing. Just
Okay.
one word is in Hebrew and the other is in Aramaic.
Ah, good. And what about Midrashim? Midrash, is it a part of anything?
Yeah, Midrashim, they're separate. Well, they're separate from call it the legal discourse. There are Midrashim, there are many Midrashim in the Talmud, and there are many Midrashim that are published outside of the Talmud. It's a whole literature on its own.
But this is oral Torah also?
Yes, this is all considered oral Torah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more questions on point number one? Okay, point number two. HaChachamim HaSimuchim, right? Call it the ordained wise men, rabbis, right? Asher nismechu. By the way, semicha, the word semicha means to appoint or to ordain. Has the same letters as haskama, which means to approve and to consent. So this semicha, right, that the Chachamim received, they received it from Asher nismechu al yedei Moshe, right? Moshe was the first one to appoint a court and to appoint, call it the judges, the officials of the court, the rabbis, the first rabbis. Asher nismechu al yedei Moshe behaskamat Hashem uklal ha'am, right? Moshe will say is the first ordained rabbi, the first appointed official of the court? Who appointed Moshe?
Hashem.
God.
Why would that obligate us, though? That would obligate God. You say, okay, you chose Moshe. I didn't choose Moshe. So we'll see when we go over the recording of the covenant. God appointed Moshe to represent himself to the nation. The nation later appointed Moshe to represent the nation to God. And Moshe basically served kind of like an intermediary, like a lawyer that represents two sides of a deal. God had a proposal. Moshe transmitted that proposal from God to the people. And the people say, oh, I see you have a good connection, good relations with this God. You know what? We're going to put our trust in you. And we want you to represent us back to God. So the reason why we accept Moshe to begin with is because we appointed him to represent us. And therefore, when he goes and later on appoints others to sit in that court, they all have that consensual approval of the entire nation. Right? The entire nation and God. So these Hachamim that were later appointed by Moshe, they have the authority and the ability to come and appoint other rabbis instead of them or in addition to them. Basically, ensuring a continuality of the transmission of the tradition from one generation to the next. And those could then appoint judges to the ones coming after them. And semicha zot, as we'll see later, this appointing of the Hachamim could only be done in the land of Israel. It has no validity if it's done outside the boundaries of the state of the land of Israel. Okay? Any questions? Excellent. Okay. Kol ma shekibalnu mimoshe b'Sinai. All the laws that we received from Moshe in Sinai, en bo mahloket klal. There is no disagreement upon them. If you ever see two rabbis in the Mishnah or the Talmud arguing about a certain law, then you can know that that's not one of the laws that we received from Moshe in Sinai. Ela kol ha'machlokot nov'ot mipirtei hadinim. Right? So where do all the disagreements between the rabbis come? You know, we say between every two Jews there are 3 opinions. So where do all these opinions come from? If everything we received from Moshe was agreed upon, consensus, national consensus, there is no disagreements, where do all these mahlokot come from? So they come from the details of the laws, right? There are 613 laws that Moshe needs to actually teach the entire nation. And he needs to teach them the details, all the different details of the laws, right? And these, a lot of these laws include things to do with relations between two neighbors, right? Your fence is edging into my property, and your bull your bull, got my cow pregnant, and who does the baby belong to, and all these different scenarios that come up in life that there are infinite scenarios for, that Moshe couldn't teach the entire nation all these different details for every single scenario that may occur someday over the course of the next 3, 4, 5,000 years. So, what does he teach? He teaches the laws, he teaches the general rules, he teaches some of the details of those rules. However, many other questions arise over the years that need to be brought to court, and the court needs to decide what the law is. And that is why we appoint the judges over us. So when these new scenarios come to court, כשהם מובאים לבית הדין, רשאים הדיינים לדון בדבר, להכריע על פי כללים מוסכמים מראש ממתן תורה. So when these cases come to court, the judges, they have the authority, and that's what they're meant to do, is to decide what the law is. But how do they do that? How do they decide what, even the process of deciding the law is an agreed upon process. We've already agreed on the process in advance. There are 13, called 13 midot, שהתורה נדרשת בהן. There are 13 tools that the judges have in their tool case to approach the written text and extract a law from the written text. However, there are 13 different rules. One judge may go according to one rule. Another judge will go according to another one. And now they need to discuss and convince each other which verdict makes more sense, which opinion makes more sense. And if they all agreed on one person's opinion, because they one managed to convince the others that his logic is superior to theirs, then that's it. There's no more machloket. We've reached a new consensus. The machloket has come to an end. And if they didn't manage to convince each other, then what? What happens if they can't reach an agreement? No, any opinions? Don't be shy to make a mistake. What would you think? I'm going to pick someone out at random. Jane Kim.
I'm sorry.
If they can't reach an agreement, what do?
They take a vote.
There you go. They take a vote. And what happens when they take a vote?
They go with the majority.
They go with the majority. And now what?
Mhm.
And now we have a consensus. Understood?
It's true.
All right, excellent. Any questions? Okay, the fourth point is a very, very important point. מאז הברית בחורב, since the covenant that we established with God back at Sinai or in Mount Chorev, אשר התקבלה במעמד ובהסכמת כלל העם, right, which was accepted in front of the entire nation. אין אדם, נביא, או אף הקדוש ברוך הוא רשאי לחדש ולשנות דבר בתורה. Once we seal the covenant with God, nobody has the authority to change the terms of the covenant. When I say nobody, it means no person, no prophet, and not even God himself can come and alter the terms of the covenant, the contract that we did with him. So, by the way, the penalty of a prophet coming to annul a law or change a law, or even give a commentary or an interpretation to a law that was not part of our oral tradition, the penalty for that is death. It's a capital punishment. That's how seriously we take our commitment that we contracted with God himself. God can't even change it. And there have been many attempts over the years. This is what the pasuk says, Lo b'shamayim hi. The Torah is not in the heavens. What does that mean? How would you interpret that? Not in the heavens. Lo b'shamayim hi.
It is given to the to mankind to dispose of it.
Exactly. It's no longer in the realm of heavens. It's in the realm of man. We say Moshe kibel Torah Sinai. Moshe received, right, the law, the Torah from Sinai, from God. Umsara, and he transmitted to the courts, Liyushua, L'Zkenim, L'Nevi'im. The jurisdiction over the Torah has left the realm of heavens and is now in the realm of the Jewish judicial system. It's now entrusted to the court, the Supreme Court. And they are the only ones who have any authority over the oral tradition. And anyone trying to claim that God told them to alter that tradition is capital punishment. מאחר שנחתמה התלמוד, all right? Once the Talmud was, canonized, was sealed, ומפני שמאז חתימתה לא היה מוסד היכולה לקבץ את החכמים לדיון, right? Ever since the Talmud was sealed, there was no longer any institution that was able to gather all the Chachamim, all the wise men, for to discuss the law. Therefore, the Talmud itself is considered to be the last national court that had the consensus of the entire nation. And the Talmud itself also spread out throughout the entire nation, during our 2000-year exile. So we used to have a national court. This national court had judges that were appointed by 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 Moses, who was appointed by who?
God.
No.
The nation.
Moshe was appointed by God, but we don't care about that.
By other Jews?
Israel.
By the people, by the nation.
Yeah.
Okay. So therefore, and we said this appointing of the Chachamim could only be done in the land of Israel, and it has no validity out of the land of Israel. So the Talmud was basically the recordings of the last final national authoritative court.
Hadasa. Nase ne ako todo na ite te mai piore. Do kia mere
Sorry?
ha tau roi ne wane ke si aku hau. Kanora ta ko kia kirai.
Oh, okay. I understood every word of that, by the way.
I don't think she realizes her mic is.
No, I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. All right. So since the canonizing and the sealing of the Talmud, which is basically what represents our last national court, and it also spread out throughout the entire nation. That's therefore the Talmud itself is considered our most authoritative law. Any law that was instituted or recorded in the Talmud is called the final law until we can reinstitute a national court.
Can I ask how many judges were in this court?
This court would have constituted hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of legitimate judges. Now, the national court itself, when it sits, in its sitting, it has 71 active judges. However, beside them, there could be hundreds and thousands of other ordained judges who are also qualified to sit in court. And maybe they take turns. Maybe one day you could think of it kind of like jury duty in the United States. Just to be like court duty for anyone who's qualified to serve in the court.
Like they are on the list, like Eldad.
They are qualified or appointed or authorized to serve on the national court. But the seating, when the court sits, there has to be 71 judges in it. For instance, they have smaller courts as well. There's more, call it the municipal courts of 23 judges. And the smallest court would be a court of 3 judges. Right now, you could have hundreds of thousands of people who are qualified to sit in that kind of a court. You could also be in darker times where there aren't so many people who are qualified. But when you have a case that you need to take to court, you can find 3 qualified judges, 3 qualified dayanim, and they can make a court to judge your case.
What is that means that you can choose those 3 judges, or who chooses them?
Well, 3 judges would be for more personal issues. So yes, you can choose. If same way that many contracts today end with, in the case of any dispute, we agree to go to this court.
Okay, so it's like an arbitrary court, something like that.
Exactly. And if both sides agreed to a certain court to judge between them and to decide who owes who what, then that decision is binding on both parties.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
I'm gonna skip the 6th one. Maybe we'll discuss it at the end of the course. All right, and I just want to end with something brought in a book called Sefer HaKabbalah, the Book of Tradition. It was written by Rabbi Abraham ibn Daud. Right, Abraham ben David ibn Daud, because he was in Muslim Spain, lived around 900 years ago. By the way, this whole text that we'll be studying was compiled by 4 sources, mostly 4 sources. 2 of them were Maimonides. How well do you know Maimonides? Studied any Maimonides? Okay, so Maimonides lived about I think he passed away about 820 years ago. He was from Spain. We're going to learn about, where he came from, because that's actually a key factor in the development of the oral law. And he wrote a commentary to the Mishnah. He wrote a summary of the entire Talmud, all the conclusions of the discussions, right? All the legal conclusions, what to do and what not to do. He wrote them all down in a book he calls the Mishneh Torah, secondary to the Torah. And he's really one of the only, there are very few others who actually wrote about every single aspect of Judaism. And when I say every single aspect, he went into the details of how to build the temple, how to build the altar, all the laws regarding the sacrifices, once we rebuild the temple and rebuild an altar, and every single aspect that has been out of practice for the past 2,000 years, he wrote down in very meticulous detail. Besides his works on philosophy and or Jewish thought and things like that. So he wrote a very detailed introduction to the Mishnah, which is a very important work. And he also wrote an introduction to the oral law in general at the beginning of his book, the Mishneh Torah. Besides that, there is another Hachams, Rabbi Avraham ibn Daud, who came out of that same yeshiva as him, 1 generation earlier, who basically wrote a book. He calls it the Book of Tradition, where he goes through the different generations and he explains about the historical events that happened. And there's another source that I compiled this essay from, and it's called The Letter of Rav Shira Gaon. He was one of the heads of the yeshivot where the Talmud was sealed. And he was asked the question many years later, after the Talmud was sealed. He was asked, how was the Talmud written? And he responded in a 30-page letter, detailing a lot of different aspects of the transmission process of the oral tradition. And so between these 4 writings, 2 of them Maimonides, one Rav Shira Gaon, and the Book of Transmission by Rabbi Avraham ibn Daud, one expands more about an issue that another person wrote in 1 sentence. And it gives us a much, much clearer view. And so I took these 4 and I put them together, not one after the other, but based on, if they're talking about the same subject, then bring them together. I will understand it. And Sefer Kabbalah will give us an historical context to those things that were happening. What was happening at the time that the Mishnah was written? What triggered the writing of the Mishnah? What triggered the writing of the Talmud? All right, so Kitavnuhu is saying, why did we write this book? This is the opening to his book, the book Sefer HaKabbalah. Kitavnuhu lehudia latalmidim. We wrote it in order to advise the students, to bring to their attention that all the words of our Chachamim who passed away, blessed memory, Chachamei Mishnah v'Talmud, but all the Chachamim, all the rabbis mentioned the Mishnah and the Talmud, kulam mikubbalim, they were all accepted and received in an oral tradition. Hacham Gadol v'Sadiq. There were men of tremendous wisdom, and there were men there was Sadiq. Sadiq means that they had good midot. They were honorable people. Mipi Hacham Gadol v'Sadiq, right? There's one wise teacher with integrity passing on to another with just as much integrity and just as much wisdom. Rosh Yeshiva v'Siato, right? The head of the court, or the head of the yeshiva and his entire group, entire court. Mipi Rosh Yeshiva v'Siato, right? They accepted it from an entire court themselves. Me'anshe Knesset HaGedolah, all the way back to the men of the Great Assembly, Shekibilu Ma'nevi'im, who received their old tradition from the prophets, from the era of the prophets. Zecher Kulam Livracha, right? May they all be of blessed memory. Ul'olam Chachmei Talmud, and all the Chachamim of the Talmud, V'chol Shekin Chachmei Mishnah, and even more so the Chachamim of the Mishnah. Afilu davar katan lo amru milibam. They didn't even say one little word from their own logic, except for the takanot and the gezerot shetikenu be'askamat kulam, except for the things that they enacted with the consensus of the entire people. Everything else was received in a tradition. And these takanot that they did was for one purpose, only to prevent people from transgressing an afira of the Torah. Right, and if someone wants to come and say, because we see that in the Talmud there are different, there are different opinions about the law, so therefore I am skeptical if it's even, if the Torah is really came from the heavens or not, because otherwise everyone would have agreed. So you answer them. What would you answer them? If someone were to say that to you, what would you say? What were the disputes between the Chachamim? What were their disagreements on? Says Shelo nihleku razal le'olam be'ikar misvah. Right, the Chachamim could see in the Talmud, they never disputed the essence of a misvah. If a misvah was a misvah, and what are the basic conditions of the misvah? Ela betoldotea, only in the details that came much finer details of a misvah. Sheshamu ikara mirabotehem, right? That they learned the basics or the general rules of each misvah from their teachers. Velo she'alum al toldotea mipnei shelo shimshu kol tzorchan. Right? But they couldn't interrogate and investigate every single nuance that would come out later. Any questions? Either I did a very good job and everyone understood everything, or I did a terrible job and nobody knows what to ask.
No, you're very clear.
Okay, I'm happy to hear that.
I want to ask a question, but I'm not sure if I can phrase it well. Like, so you said there, how can I say, cases the rabbis came to agreement. Either
Right.
if it didn't come to agreement, we voted, and you said it's sealed, no one can change. But how do we distinguish? Is there like different categories, which is either sealed or which is disputable?
That's
or we choose
actually
is
a
like-
very good question. And as long as there's a national court, and let's say one court reached a certain decision, right? They sat down, 71 judges. They heard a certain case, and they say the law should be this in this case, and it's not sealed and settled law. In Jewish law, there is no such thing as precedence. We don't say, "Oh, this court decided to make this verdict, and therefore I'm going to follow in their footsteps and reach the same verdict." No, because the judges need to check every single case, and they have their own way of understanding. If they're appointed judges, then they have the authority to see things differently than a previously appointed court. And this keeps the Torah alive and dynamic, because many times the decision of the court could be, it could reflect the times, right? What's going on in this generation. And they may be dealing with a certain issue that a later court or a previous court didn't have to deal with. There are certain call it enactments of the courts that they cannot be overridden ever. We'll get a lot more into the details of what yes and what not later on in the course.
Okay, so thank you.
I have a question, please.
Yes, Winnie.
Okay. The cases that were taken to the 71 judges were they special cases, or all court cases were taken to the 71 judges?
Okay, that's also a very good question, and we will get more into that later. Just to answer your question briefly, new cases that haven't been heard before would eventually have to reach the Supreme Court to make a decision. If it's a certain case came to court and we already have settled law on the matter, we just need the judges to decide who owes who what based on the law, then that could be settled in a court of 3 or in a court of 23. However, if it's something that, it's a case that they haven't heard yet before, then that would go from the court of 3 to the court of 23. The court of 23 would say, we don't know, and it would go up to the Supreme Court of 71, and it would be their job to decide. Any more questions? Pleasure.
Is there an appeal to a decision of a court?
Of the 71? No, I'm not aware of such a thing.
Of 71, I would doubt, but the lesser courts maybe.
I don't think so. No, I don't. I'm not familiar with such a thing in Jewish law. I could be wrong, but
Okay,
not,
it's just
not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge.
yeah, but I heard often say that in Judaism there is no democracy. Like this judiciary system is something very special. I think it cannot be said because of the number of the judges that it is a certain democracy.
So I didn't quite understand the question. If you can repeat it.
Well, it's just the question if there is democracy or absolutely not in this system of
Okay,
judging.
So there's two things. Judaism, we'll call it, there's 3 national institutions. There is the political system, and the judicial system, and the religious system, right? The religious, with the rituals, everything has to do with the rituals in the Beit Mikdash, in the temple, right? So that's led by the priest, the Kohanim. There is the political system, which is a monarchy. And then there's the judicial system, which is, as we described, the system where everything has to be done through consensus. Now, the monarch, the king, he has no authority to legislate any laws outside of taxes and going to war. And even going to war, he doesn't have the authority to go out to any war, right? He has to go, he has an obligation to take care of the security of the country. However, if he decides that, you know what, there's good, nice lands in Syria, and I want to go and conquer Syria, he has the right to want to conquer Syria and see benefit in it, and it may even be a good idea. However, he would need the court's approval to authorize such a war. This will be called milchemet reshut, an optional war. So there is like we say, separation between the state and church. So over here we have a separation between, call it the state, the religious institution, and the judicial system, which, by the way, everything to do with the oral law, right? What we're discussing here isn't the religious institution, it's the judicial system.
Okay, thank you very much. A little to have an idea, because once upon a time, I was a lawyer. So
Oh, okay. Anything else?
This is not a question, but I wanted to add that when I read this Torah, I was surprised. Oh, democracy from this here. When we talked about that, we decide with a case which can't be directly ruled by commandments. We decide by voting. When majority voted to certain agreed on this opinion, I thought democracy must be from here, derived from here.
Right. Well, in a way, the question is, are we talking about political democracy or legislative democracy? Right. So in a way, a lot of democracy does come from here. However, there are certain things that are left to the monarch to his absolute discretion, whatever he decides, certain things that are within his authority. And over there is no democracy. For instance, it could be compared to the military, right? The military doesn't function as a democracy. However, it is a branch of we'll call it the entire national institutions. That branch isn't democratic, but it functions within a democratic system. Okay, if there are no other questions, I think we'll finish for today.
Thank you.
And next week we'll start reading the terms and understanding the process of the covenant itself.